go ahead and kick us off. So. I had one topic that I thought was pretty cool for all of you today. Um, who here who wants to hear more about Copilot? No, just me? Well, you're going to hear about Copilot anyway. Okay, we got a few hands raised. It wasn't just me strong arming everyone into listening to Copilot talk some more. So, Terraform Copilot has announced, or sorry, we haven't announced, but we've rolled out V2 of the Terraform Copilot. And you might be wondering what that really means in the world of usage, more or less. But I wanted to kind of show you a bit more of what these examples are now capable of. So the other day, I was looking at this architecture, and I think the most appropriate thing for Copilot to generate is an OpenAI end-to-end chat, because isn't that kind of funny and ironic? This is an architecture that I pulled from the Microsoft Learn website. Everyone can see that, by the way, right? Okay. Yeah, so here is a architecture that I pulled from one of the Microsoft Learn pages. Obviously, this isn't written for you in Terraform code, but if you go here and you click Copilot, you can text-to-speech a lot of this. There are some things that you need to specifically say. You need to say Terraform configuration at some point. Terraform and configuration, they don't have to be right next to each other. But the way that I did it was I actually separated these into a front end and a back end. So the front end here is my app gateway, all the build agent, app service stuff, and then the back end. And I just chucked that mostly because of the character limits for the input and saw what it spit out. I know that I'm not running it live for you all today. That's because I recently tried running it live and had some problems, so I won't tempt the demo gods for a second time. Here is what I ended up getting. So I had a pretty good result, I would say. Obviously, we can dig through some of this a bit, but it was actually pretty receptive to me wanting to link up all of these subnets to an ACR, a storage, the OpenAI service, the Key Vault, all of that. Created the Kubernetes cluster, which was going to be my compute here, my container registry, storage account, and keep in mind all of this was one prompt. Granted, it was a rather long prompt that asked for essentially the diagram in text, but then it also has private endpoint and then a few outputs as well, just to put icing on the cake. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like this is ready to be deployed in production, but I will say that these implicit dependencies, the different things that are going on to make this code look a bit more like it's production, that actually came out of the box with V2. So overall, I think this I would consider about like a 70 to 80% of the way there sort of thing. On the other hand, for the front end, I was especially concerned about my app gateway because as I'm sure those of you who have been on this call before know, app gateway can be a heck of a fun time. So we had the app gateway created. Obviously, I am not sure if it's going to run into problems in a production environment, but at the very least, it seems like we're off to a strong start here. They've created a lot of the right settings and they've configured this, and then it really becomes from here the work to clean up different things, including the app gateway probably mostly, but we got things like our private DNS zone, our private endpoint, all of that is set up here. Whether or not you feel like this is at par with what you're looking for is up to your personal thoughts, but I think because of this improvement in V2, the code quality, and again, you can call me a liar, but I'm promising you I didn't touch this code at all. This is what I got from just finagling with different prompts with Copilot. One thing I will say is if you find a prompt that works, it might work one way one day and completely differently the other day. So just keep experimenting and tinkering away with that. I heard someone with a question. I'll pause for that. No question? Well, I guess I'll open it up for anyone else. Does anyone have questions about this Copilot experience? And while we're talking, I'll give it a relatively harmless prompt.
Hi,
If there are
question
no
for you,
questions.
Stephen. It's
Yep.
Darren here. Hi. The Copilot prompt you're using here, I see it's in the Azure portal.
Yep.
Is it only available in the portal, or is there a VS Code extension that can do Terraform configuration on demand?
We're working on it. Not yet.
Okay.
Right now, you're gonna have to go to the portal specifically.
Cool.
So
That's a start.
Yeah, so we've heard a lot of feedback from customers that they spend their time in VS Code, so they want this functionality and the same quality responses from VS Code. So we are working with the team that is essentially exposing the @Azure. So you can do @Azure and ask a Terraform question, and it'll give you it'll use our same handler, so our same plugin.
Great, thanks.
I know this isn't super clear here. We are working on improving this experience as well, but you can see that it created a cognitive deployment, the Kubernetes cluster, the actual cognitive account as well. And it will always, I think, create this resource group and the provider block for you. Other questions?
I have a question, please.
Yep.
My question is, would this Copilot be aware of my already existing configuration? Let's say, for example, the app gateway you used, I want to use like a pre-configured subnet instead of like letting it create a new one because I have maybe some rules that sync back to on-premise and I would like for it to stay that way.
Yeah, I think we're working on that from a environment aware perspective, but right now this is just interacting in a sort of environment agnostic manner. Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong there, but it isn't necessarily factoring on all of that, but that's something we are looking at.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a bunch of answers to that. The first one is you can, in your natural language prompt, you can mention the existing resource group, and it should use that. So if you refer to it as an existing resource group, it should take that into account when it gives you the response. The other thing, like Stephen mentioned, we have been asked and we have on our backlog to consider existing infrastructure. So you can, instead of having a generic response, the Copilot will respond taking into account your existing infrastructure and patterns and those types of things. And also, as we move over to VS Code, we expect, or we're planning on doing the same there. So if you have files that you're using, we'll be able to take advantage of.
Thank you.
Plan on taking advantage of those as well.
A few months ago, I believe there was a tool demoed in the export template, like the automation in the portal, where you could
Totally.
actually doing Bicep and Terraform. Has there been any progress on that, or
Yeah.
when that GA?
Let me.
Because that would be a solution to what the previous question was, I think.
So, sort of, but also a little bit different. So if you look here, in the export template right now, there's ARM templates and then there's Bicep. The reason why Terraform didn't get rolled out here was some of the issues around the resource provider. We are there is a long-winded answer that I'll spare everyone. Essentially, we're working on improving that experience to make sure it'll work for customers. The way that we had initially built it when we released it was causing most people to fail on the first time they were running the tooling. If you're a Bicep user, this is a great place to get started. But I would also say that for everyone in general, definitely keep your eye out. We are working on it. We're not giving up on it. We just need to fix the experience because the way that we had released it was a bit of an oopsie on our part. So we apologize for that. Those of you who are in the community, I think we had specific instructions on how to register, but there was the manual approval process and all of that. So what I will say is the resource provider itself is actually something that you can register now. So if you are interested on the MS Learn for Terraform, if you're willing to try to do some querying of your own, there is a quick reference doc over here now under the Azure Terraform resource provider. And I haven't talked too much about this, mostly because well, for one, this whole thing is in flux. So this whole section, we actually have a PR to delete because it's no longer up to date. But you could do AZ provider register, Microsoft Azure Terraform, and then you can actually go and use the REST API, which I don't even know if that's up to date either. So, but for those of you who have used the tool before and are familiar with it, you can register the provider if that's something you're looking to do, and then make some calls directly to the API. Again, apologize that that hasn't come out yet. I know we were trying to build some excitement around it for a bit, but definitely keep your eye out. Any other questions about that Copilot demo?
Have you been successful in trying to get it to create, say, modules and things like that, other than just individual files?
Is that supported, Mark? I know we're working on AVM support.
No, we haven't don't have any training data on that. We're just creating root modules with it right now. Like I said, we do plan on incorporating AVM modules and potentially kind of the end users modules, be able to respond to those, and that might end up being a VS Code thing. But we do want to expand it so it's not just providing the AVM resource responses, but it can incorporate kind of your modules and what have you.
Great, thank you.
But actually, your question was more around creating modules.
Well,
what is your thinking there, or what
so
is?
Basically doing what you answered. You made it right into my little question there. Is being
Okay.
able to go and pull from the AVM, the modules, and basically inject code that maybe is related to your scenario, right? Like you
Okay.
just showed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm pretty successful with using it with Copilot to generate Terraform and asking it to separate the files into variables and Terraform TFRs and things like that. And it works great. It's been getting better, that's for sure.
Good to hear.
Any other questions about that? Or related to Copilot? Okay, I have one more thing that I thought was good for all of you to be aware of. We are in the middle of trying to figure out some of the, or I just saw a comment here, so I wanted to make sure that it was clear. One thing that we kind of, I'll be honest, weren't as aware of was the power of some of the pre-flight capabilities of the AZ API provider that released in 2.0. I know that some people get issues with policies blocking deployments in the Azure provider, and we're still working to see what we can do about that. But if you are using the AZ API provider, that will actually go ahead and check your policies when you're doing Terraform plans. So if you're on AZ API 2.0 or later, definitely make use of that. It's hidden underneath an enable pre-flight feature flag. That's the name of the flag. But it honestly is, it's really really useful for a lot of different situations. And we are actually trying to do some more investigations into how far the reach of that goes. Like, does it work on subnets or otherwise? So thank you, Jared, for pasting in the chat how to enable pre-flight as well. Okay, and I am going to open it up from here on out. So this next half hour is all yours. Does anyone have anything that they are top of mind with? Dominique has a question. Would you recommend AZ API over Azure for greenfield projects? Well, you know, I'm going to always use the most boring answer, which is it depends. But the way that we have not only Microsoft, but also HashiCorp sort of agreed upon in terms of messaging is we have said that if you are looking to do latest and greatest functionality, if you're constantly changing API versions, and yes, Jared has once again posted a link from me, so thank you again, Jared. If you're trying to update your API versions and you're trying to always switch and you are just sitting there pulling your hair out because Azure M's like 3 versions behind on a service you really need, you probably want a greenfield and AZ API. If you're building modules that are reusability and consumability for others is a top priority, you're like the COE of your team, all of that, AZ API should be good. If you're looking for stability, if you're looking for simplicity, if you're looking for things that are built and sort of consuming some of the complexities for you, Azure M is the way to go. And I will work my way through the hands. So Mark.
Yeah, so I would do 2 things. One, we have both providers. Both providers are fully supported by Microsoft and our team and HashiCorp. So kind of make that as a statement and then kind of turn it around to you and ask the question of what concerns or thoughts do you have on using one or the other in a greenfield environment?
I think that question is directed to you, Dominique, if you're able to come off.
Yeah, so I think the thing that I'm trying to focus on is the standards for what I want to suggest to my team lead to say, here's what we should be using. And the AZ API provider sounds like it has really good support for stuff like the pre-flight checks and then always being up to date with whatever latest stuff is dropping on the portal. Sounds like a really good way to do it. And one of the other things that I do a lot is generating code for existing resources. So if I'm sure it supports import blocks and stuff, so that's probably also going to suit my use. And I have had things in the past where using the Azure RM module stuff, it's like, this feels a little different than how it actually exists in the API, and the ways that things can be split into separate resources in Terraform, even though they're like the same resource in the portal, that is sometimes a convenience. And I guess the AZ API also supports stuff like that. So I guess the one that comes to mind is more Entra. So it's like if you have a group, then the group members can be separate Terraform resources. So like the group membership itself is also a thing. I guess I struggled to come up with a example for Azure RM instead of the AD side, but like an application gateway, if you were to have a backend pool or something configured as a separate resource, I don't know if that's supported yet, but that kind of thing, will the AZ API provider have instances of that where it's managing one resource but using multiple Terraform resources?
I was going to say, an example that you just said then is dependent on the API, right? So in that example of I think you said backends or front ends in App Gateway, if you look at the API reference, they're not actually child resources, they're just the property on the parent resource. So AZ API can only support what's in the API, right? So
yeah, that makes sense.
It's if the API makes that a child resource, then it will automatically be supported as a child resource.
And for those who aren't familiar with this whole provider conversation, Azure, there's a lot of work that's put into it by both HashiCorp and Microsoft engineering teams to try to simplify the resource modeling or the way you think about these configurations. AZ API is a direct reflection of those APIs. So it is Terraform, it is Terraform code, it is HCL, but it will have some of that representation that Jared said. It's not going to try to make its own opinion on what it should or shouldn't be.
Just some of the things that we find, I'm part of the team that develops Azure verified modules, and one of the things that we find really useful is the retry functionality in AZ API, because you can be quite granular about what types of errors you retry on. So whether it's a eventual consistency on role assignments and things like that, that's something that you can code for with AZ API and stop your run failing for something that you know is going to eventually be consistent, which is not as easy to do with Azure, or it's not possible to do with Azure. You have to set arbitrary timeouts and things like that, right? And you don't know how long you have to wait. With AZ API, you can actually make it retry until that known error goes away, basically. So that's another thing to consider with AZ API if you need that kind of control.
Yeah, I've definitely had fun trying to create role assignments and things, getting a little crazy.
Yeah.
One other thing I just wanted to say, sorry, Antonino, I know if you've been waiting patiently. If you have existing stuff and you have the AZ API VS Code extension, I want to run a quick 30-second demo here. If you have something like an existing resource group, in the portal, there is a JSON view, which gives you all of your code in the form of, well, a JSON rather. So you can actually go ahead and copy this JSON, move over to your Terraform VS Code your VS Code. And if you have the extension, this is going to paste this AZ API, which it is not right now. And that is wonderful. Let's see if my extension is broken right now. Nope, it's on. Well, I love tempting the demo gods again. But if you are on AZ API 2.0, that is a feature that we released with it that refuses to work, like all of my other demos. I think I'm like 0 for 3 this year on live demoing, so sorry about that. But yes, Dominique, definitely try that out as well. The VS Code extension is very powerful. Antonino, thank you for your patience.
No problem. We literally ran into this today, and I just wanted to bring it up here since it's a community call. When did the Azure RM require explicit subscription ID to be like part of the backend or the provider config?
It's version 4. It started. Yeah.
4. Okay, thank you.
4.0. Yeah. There is, if you look on the issues, there is an open issue that could use some votes if you're interested. I'm not trying to advocate for that, like to potentially fall back for that developer workflow.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay.
Other thoughts? Anyone else have something top of mind? Brandon.
Hey, how's it going? I just had a question. So I'm having to deploy Azure Policy at scale pretty recently, and doing some research. It looks like EPAC is mostly PowerShell based, and the PowerShell or the Terraform references are going back to like the antique landing zone Terraform deployment. And my biggest gripe with some of these is that you have to kind of store your own version of these JSONs for the policies. And I know Microsoft has a lot of the ALZ ones in a repo of their own, right? Do we have some sort of way to, because I know the verified modules has like a policy assignment module that's been published, but that's for assignments. And I'm just wondering if we have a way to reference the Microsoft repo for some of these policies without having to store your own version of them, if that makes sense.
Store your own version of the module or the
The
policies.
Yeah.
That
way you don't have to keep versioning.
Which module are you talking about? Sorry, you mentioned ALZ there, right?
Yeah, so I mean the old ALZ platform, archetypes and all that module, the really big extended one before you did AVM, but that I'm pretty sure required you to store the JSON files in your own repo, and so it then it becomes a fork and any changes that Microsoft does we won't get unless we're we're duplicating that in their own repo. So I'm just wondering if there's a way to reference the Microsoft repo for the source of those policies.
So we've got no plans to backport that library for the CAF enterprise scale module, if that's what you're asking.
No. So I just mean in general. So I know ALZ policies are still updated every now and then. And I'm just wondering if the EPAC is really the solution. So using PowerShell instead of Terraform.
No, so with the new AVM modules for the platform landing zone for ALZ, we've got a library. I've just posted it in the chat. The modules for ALZ reference that library now, so that's our source of truth for policies, definitions and assignments, and also the management group structure as well. That will be used by Bicep and eventually be used by the portal as well. So we'll have one source of truth for all those policies. If you want to use that library in your own code, you're welcome to. And if you want to add your own library, it's like an extensible thing, so you could reference your own library if you wanted to as well. Does that answer the question? Or
yeah, I mean, as long as it's as there's a way to reference, so not storing the policies in my repo.
We haven't. There's an inheritance. It's an inheritance basically. So you reference our library, ALZ. We've got some others in there like Amber as well, and SLZ and FSI are in there as well. But if you reference ALZ, you can then layer on top of that your own custom policies. You can turn some of our policies off and what have you. But you only have to. Your files are just a subset. You don't have to pull the whole library across. And then if we version the library, so there's specific release versions. So if you target a new release, you'll get any new policies and what have you from the new release.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll look into that.
That's how it works now. So if I'll share some more links in a second that will help.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
So question about that, Jared. I'm looking at your policy set definitions in that ALZ module. Did I hear you correctly that those are eventually going to be published as built-in policy set definitions?
So we use many of them get converted to built-in. So that library is actually reduced over time as they've been migrated to built-in. Wherever we can, if you look in that library, you'll see that our policy sets are basically referencing built-in policies wherever they can. There's only a few actual policy definitions left in there now for things that just aren't built in yet. So as we migrate our policies from ALZ into built-in ones, we remove them from that library basically and reference the built-in one instead. Did that answer the question? Sorry.
Yeah.
And some policy sets are also built in as well.
Because right now the intent, it seems like if I were to use this module, correct me if I'm wrong, then for the non-built-in policy set definitions, they're going to get provisioned to my environment.
Yes.
And then if this module, if they eventually get updated, if this module, like we increment the version and we migrate some of these policies to built-in, then when you reapply this module with a new version, then it's gonna
destroy those old policy set definitions or policy definitions that weren't built in, but were provisioned as part of this module, and switch over to use the built-ins. Is that the life cycle?
Basically, yeah. So there might be a short period of time whilst you're doing that apply where you don't have that policy applied, but we call that out in release notes and stuff when we're doing things like that. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Who's next? Anyone have some top? Well, I've never had this silence last for more than a few minutes, so I'll sit here for a bit and someone will inevitably pipe.
Yeah, Stephen, per comment, has just tried a couple of resources on that AZ API extension. So it looks quite very impressive. Not sure if I can, well, don't know if I'm able to share, but I'll chuck in a screenshot of what it's produced.
You can give it a shot. I think you should be able to share your screen.
Well, I've chucked in a screenshot, which basically shows what's being produced. This is just a virtual network from a sandbox subscription, so not giving away any secrets there. I hope.
No, that is what the demo was meant to produce. All my demo god luck has gone to you, Noel. So thank you for it. Glad to use it.
And I say I put in a virtual machine, and it produced a much larger version, which just looks great.
It's good. Awesome to hear that. Paul, you're next.
Yeah, I had a quick question. I recently went to the Microsoft AI Day at the Javits Center in New York City, and I was wondering if AZ API will be supporting like environmental setups with like Copilot or Azure Foundry Studio. Like it seemed like there's a lot that need to be set up through the portal, and I was wondering if that functionality will be set up and available through AZ API or not.
If you're referring to if Copilot will be supporting AZ API, yeah, I think that's on the docket. We're definitely working on it actively. So we don't have it. Go ahead.
That's actually it was done before we released the quality improvements, but to prevent us from pushing the release because we needed to test it and do some additional validation, we held it off. So it will be in the next release that we do, which I don't have a timeline for right now, but it will definitely be there. So you'll be able to ask Copilot and it will be able to respond with AZ API. One of the things we're trying to work through is how kind of the experience of how the Copilot knows whether you want an Azure RM response or an AZ API response. And that kind of ties to the AVM thing that we talked about before as well. So how it's going to know if you want any one of those options to be responded to. So right now, I think the initial release will be if you have AZ API in the question, it will respond with AZ API. And otherwise, it will do Azure RM. Or the concern that I have with that, though, is I don't want us to provide any bias in Copilot, meaning from our perspective, customers should use whichever provider works for them. So I don't want there to be a default per se. So that's one of the things that we're kind of working through right now. So.
Okay, thanks.
Is there a custom prompt for your user associated with the Copilot that persists between different sessions so that you could say, like, remember that I prefer AZ API or remember that I prefer Azure RM?
I would love that, but that does not exist. And I don't think there are any plans for that by the portal Copilot team. So, I mean, there are a bunch of different scenarios that would be good for.
Are there other preferences off the top of your head besides just a drop down for the provider that you prefer?
Well, the modules, whether you want to use modules, and then I would imagine like if you have or the customer has their own modules, kind of giving a path to that. There are a bunch of different things that we could include in there.
Sounds like you should create an Azure resource to contain the preferences and then use Azure API to define your preferences. That would be self-referential.
We will look into that.
If you actually followed through on that and not just a joke suggestion, then you could maybe use import blocks or something else to have different workspaces configure the preferences differently as well.
Yeah, for sure. I will definitely put that on the list to talk to the team about, and I think it's a interesting idea for sure. So we take the dependency, so we don't have to depend on the portal team for that. That we actually provide that functionality for Terraform itself, or our handler itself. Thank you.
You've piqued Mark's interest, Dominic.
Definitely.
Oh, one thing I almost forgot about. Is anyone planning on coming to the DevOps conference in April? That's in Seattle. It's technically the PowerShell plus DevOps conference.
Now that you mention it, I might look into it.
Yeah, so Mark and I have, alongside our fellow teammates from Bicep, we have an entire dedicated track around DevOps. So there's going to be a ton of deep dives and content. It's in Seattle. It's this April. There's not a lot of time left, unfortunately. But definitely, if you are available, you should make a trip out. And Alex has posted the link to it in the chat, so thank you, Alex. I think we have 4 sessions. Is that right, Mark?
In total, between Bicep and Terraform, we have 8 sessions, and they range everything from, we have like a keynote for IAC, we have 101s, we have deep dives, we have AVM session, so we have a whole slew of them. So, and the community there, I've been part of that community for a long time, and it is a fantastic group of folks. So it'd be great to kind of combine kind of this community with the PowerShell community, because I think there's a lot of synergies there.
If you do end up coming, we would love to meet and say hi to any of you. Next community call might be a little late to get people to sign up, but we're hoping that we can schedule things with all of you. So, all right, we still have 15 minutes left. What do people have next, top of mind?
My understanding is that when you're interacting with Azure and Terraform, then when it's refreshing the state and trying to detect any drift, it's fetching the resources one by one. Is there any roadmap or stuff that you're aware of for using something like the Graph API to fetch like all the resources in the state file at once?
I don't know if you're familiar with the inner workings of that, Mark. I know there are GET requests, but I always assumed that they were kind of running at the same time.
I'm not aware of any work that's happening around that now.
Yeah, I guess if the requests are at the same time, then it wouldn't really make a difference.
Yeah, I think in general, Terraform tries to keep everything siphoned into individual sandbox almost, right? So if you have one sandbox for each resource, you're just kind of chucking all of those requests at the same time into the um, world of Azure.
There is some throttling. You can control it through the CLI by changing the parallel. I can't say that word, parallelism. There's a setting, but yeah, it's going to try and do as many GET requests as it can at once, and same for the applies. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah,
I'll look into
it is more requests, right? Because it has to do it for each individual resource. It's just the way that Terraform works, right? There's not really any getting around that.
Mhm.
It's more chatty.
Yeah.
There was a question about what sort of talks we're doing. I think, again, there will be some AVM and there will be some like one-on-one sessions for people who are new to Terraform and Bicep, but there will also be deeper dive, longer sessions. And I think all of you in the community are people who would be welcome, more than welcome at those sessions.
And I think the schedule is published, although the details are a little light. We have to update all of our titles and descriptions, but the gist of what we'll be covering is in the schedule.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out what days in particular, if there was like, 2 days that you guys were mostly focused on, that way, we don't have to go for the 4 days.
Yeah, makes sense. The schedule should cover that. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know how
think-
things are distributed, to be honest.
I think unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you think about it, our sessions are scattered throughout the entire week.
Yeah, we have a state of IAC on Monday. We have some 101s the next day, and then CI/CD stuff the day after. And then on the last day, we have some deep dives. So and AVM as well. So it is pretty spread. Other thoughts? Other things on people's minds?
I've got one thing just to raise. It sort of jogged my mind by the previous question about the use of graph. Something which we see, especially during busy times, and some of our Terraform modules are quite large, so we're making a huge number of requests, is that the management.azure.com starts timing out. And it doesn't appear to be the throttling sort of, that's a first reaction. And, from looking online, quite a lot of people are struggling with this. I must admit, I've forgotten what the exact error message is. And, wondering how many people here might be affected by this. And my feeling is that it's actually caused by our firewall, because I only see it on a corporate network, caching the IP address of management.azure.com, which seems to flip between two IPs.
And have you extended the timeouts on that resource? Noel, have you? Because I know in AZ API, and you can definitely set it to like 30 minutes, 60 minutes as needed.
It retries. I think within Terraform, it's got a retry mechanism for most things, so that it makes 10 attempts. So sometimes it does recover, and I think that sort of works well when you're not through our corporate firewall, for example. And I think, as I say, I think the issue is that a corporate firewall is caching the IP, so you get two IPs back. I think one's 240.10 and maybe the other one's 241.10. So when one of them goes down, probably, some form of load balancing switch over, because our firewall has cached the IP address, the DNS lookup. It keeps firing off a request to the same IP, regardless of the fact that the DNS has switched to the other one. Does that make sense?
Kind of, but yeah, if we've
That's it.
the only thing I would say that might help with that scenario is if you do use AZ API in the retries, you can where the next minor release will have some improvements to the retry when on throttling. But I don't know if it's going to help your timeout. It depends what code you get back. But the explicit retries that you can put on the resource, you could explicitly test for whatever failure code you're getting back and do retries on that. If it's just completely cutting off the connection, then there's not much you can do, right? So,
yeah, it seems to cut off the connection from the, let's say it's using IP1.
Yeah.
And when IP1 gets overloaded, which, as I say, typically this happens in the middle of a day, IP1 stops responding.
And if you're even if you were getting a response back from your proxy that was like some kind of error code, then you could still handle it with AZ API.
But how would you force it to use the other IP? The problem is our firewall is, I think, caching the DNS.
Oh yeah, it would just keep retrying until it gets a success response. So I'm not saying it's going to solve your problem, but it might help if there's time, certainly for throttling and timeout issues, it can help with that. But if your DNS is getting cached somewhere, there's not much we can do about that.
No, it's yeah, as I say, I only see it for our corporate firewall, and of course, convincing. And I know a lot of other people have, looking on the forums, a lot of people have suffered from this, and I'm guessing they're also behind a corporate firewall. Of course, getting corporations to change a firewall setting is like getting blood from a stone, sort of thing.
All right. We have a few more minutes left. I'm seeing, I was curious actually, Jeffrey, sorry to put the spotlight on you. I don't know a lot about the difference between Azure RM versus Bicep role assignment deployment, but do you mind coming off mute and kind of explaining it for me a bit? And I'm curious if it's any different if you were to try it in AZ API. I'd imagine it would be just as fun, but just curious to hear what your experience with that was.
Yeah. So when you create the role assignment, like, do you have to basically use GUIDs to get the roles or do some fun things to source those? Whereas with Azure RM, you just put the role name in and voila. So the syntax is a little weird. The inputs you have to give it, there's a lot of inputs compared to Azure RM. So very appreciative of how mature creating role assignments are with Terraform.
You can actually do a query. I think it's maybe to a graph endpoint using AZ API to look up a role by its name. I do have an example that I was working on that I'll see if I can share it with you. But that can help with that scenario. But yeah, we don't for Azure for using the API directly. You can't pass it in by name that I'm aware of. I actually own the Azure verified module for role assignments. I'm looking at how I can improve it. At the moment, it does support name for role definitions.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's one of the creature comforts of the Azure RM, right? Technically you can do exactly what you do with AZ API or Bicep and look up the role definition by ID. I actually got code in a code review from somebody doing that with Azure RM, but when you're referencing a well-known role definition, you might as well just use the well-known name. It's much more readable. Declare war on GUIDs,
Yeah, that is a great example of the Azure RM versus AZ API paradigm, if you will. Convenience versus everything
Some other
else.
convenient thing I saw that just dealing with Bicep for a little bit was, how mature like the error messages coming back from Terraform are compared to Bicep, where a lot of times you get an error message when you run a Bicep deployment and it says, go look at the portal to figure out what went wrong. Whereas Terraform usually gives you a pretty well versed error as to what happened and where you can potentially fix it. So that was something I really missed working this short time. I had to do some stuff with Bicep. So great work for everybody who's worked on that, the Azure RM stuff.
To be fair, sometimes it's not the client tool, right? It's like it's just giving you back what it gets from ARM, right? So it's more the server side folks we have to blame
Yep.
for the bad error messages, but the client tool does its best.
Does a okayest job it could do, right?
Thanks, Jeffrey. We got 2 minutes left.
If I may ask, just if we could get all the parameters for AZTF export available in a KB, so that way, because like last or 2 weeks ago, I was trying to figure out if there was a way to use the mapping file that it puts out to use like custom resource names. And I opened up an issue and somebody, was fantastic enough to, give me the parameter, but I couldn't find that parameter anywhere. So if we could just have like a polished documentation for AZTF export, that'd be great.
We do have some documentation. It might not be up to date for that specific issue that you're speaking of, but just in case, I'm going to post a link to the docs for you.
Thank you.
And I will say there's a ton of different flags / things that are being rolled out over the different versions. So we might need to take a look if that property isn't in those docs. Please let me know and we should update it. So.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. And yes, AZTF export is a Microsoft-owned initiative. So. Robani. I know we're at time, but I want to squeeze you in if you have something.
Yeah, just yesterday we have a brown bag session in our org. So one of the guy asked, is Terraform is AZTF export is a Microsoft initiative or it's open source or owned by Terraform? So these are the questions raised in our community. That's why I asked this question.
Got it. Yeah, it is open source. It is Microsoft owned. Both can be true. So
in the next month community call, could we discuss about drift management if possible?
Say that one more time.
The drift management.
Got it.
Yeah.
Totally. We can take that as an item.
Most of the communities I'm engaging with our partner, I'm joining, so they are not discussing drift management. So if you could discuss about this, it will be helpful for most of the people.
Awesome.
Yep. And yeah.
Okay. We are a little over time now, so I'm going to cut those off now, the questions off for today, but really enjoy having everyone on this call. Always great conversations and discussions. So look forward to seeing all of you next month, and that should be March 20th. So exactly a month, same exact date. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Steven. Thank you for everyone.
Bye.
Bye.